Morning.
That's it's good to while you're sitting waiting, um, try to remember what we covered, like to
Morning. I can bring more chairs out if you'd like. Okay.
Let's go ahead and start. Welcome back, everyone. First of all, good morning. So, yeah, this session is on attachment. Attachment, antidotes to attachment. And then next week will be on anger and antidotes to anger. And then the following week, that'll be the last session on compassion. But let's review a bit first before we start on attachment, and then, yeah, set a positive motivation for this session. So if you remember in the first, this kind of series, 5-part series, I guess, on some kind of basic meditation. Then in the first session, we looked at basically how to meditate in general, and look at the posture, sitting in a comfortable posture for meditation. So basically, there's 5 steps to a meditation session. To simplify it, so first sit comfortably in your meditation posture, and there's 8 points to the Vairocana posture. And then focus your attention by practicing with some placement meditation. So we'll do that in just a minute. Remember, placement meditation is where you focus your attention on an object and just try to maintain an unbroken continuity of awareness of the object. Right? So sometimes it's called mindfulness meditation, pretty much the same thing. Yes, that's a free cushion. And then you generate a positive motivation for the session. And then the actual part of the meditation session is where you do some kind of meditation, and then either placement meditation or analytical meditation or a mix of both. And then the final part is the dedication at the end. Right, so those are the 5 parts of the meditation session you set up for yourself. Posture, focusing one's attention, generating a positive motivation. And then in that also, if you like to include prayers, then you include like going for refuge, the 4 measurables, 7 in prayer, and so forth. Other prayers can go together with the motivation. And then the main point of the main section, the main part of the session, whatever you're meditating on, you do that for a certain time, and then you dedicate at the end. So that's what we covered in the first week. And then last week we looked at the mind that's meditating. What is the nature of the mind? The definition of the mind is that which is clear and knowing. When we especially spent more time, a little time looking at what does it mean to be knowing, to be aware, to experience. And then every mind has an object of experience. And then, but the mind itself, which experiences the object, is it's clear. What does it mean to be clear or luminous? Basically, it means that there's no object fixed in the awareness of the mind. Rather, different perceptions, different objects appear and pass away. Different states of mind, different attitudes, thoughts, emotions arise in our stream of awareness, stream of consciousness. But then none of them are fixed there all the time. So the nature of the mind itself is kind of like a clear mirror, or like pure water, or like space. All of which a mirror allows different reflections to appear, but none of them are fixed in the face of the mirror. Water, there can be different, colors, contaminants, different things, fish and so forth, move through the water, but none of them are of the nature of the water. So the water can always be purified, clear water. And then in space, or the sky, then things, clouds and light and dust, smoke, can all move through the sky, but none of them are of the nature of the sky. So the sky is always, its nature itself is just to be pure clarity, clear kind of void space. So our minds are like that. And so therefore, any disturbing state of mind is never fixed in our continuum. They arise. Disturbing states of mind arise in our continuum due to different causes and conditions, which we'll speak a bit more about today. But then they can always be eliminated if we eliminate the causes and conditions. And then positive states of mind, of course, are the same and that they're temporary. They arise in the mind due to different causes and conditions. Um, yeah, but the big difference is that all of the disturbing states of mind, they all arise from a fundamental misperception, misconception, kind of ignorance or confusion. So therefore, they're fundamentally unstable. Just like anything that we misapprehend. Say if we, like when we're kids at some point, I don't know, I'm sure I did some point think, like in math class, I was not very good at math when I was young. Then, you have a wrong idea about something. Say like you think 4 + 5 = 8. But because that's not true, right? 4 + 5 doesn't equal 8. So eventually, as you learn more, you recognize that, and then that misconception goes away. So that misconception, thinking, oh, 4 + 5 = 8, you might even think, very strongly, you're quite sure that that's the case. 4 + 5 = 8. But no matter how much you believe that, then it's not stable because it's not in accord with reality, right? So when reality eventually kind of seeps into your mind, then the misconception is dispelled. So so today we'll speak about attachment, but all of our disturbing states of mind, attachment, anger, jealousy, arrogant pride, fear, worry, um, all of our suffering experiences, not only states of mind, but all of our suffering experiences arise from fundamental misconception, ignorance, a misunderstanding of the way we exist, the way other things exist. And so therefore, all of it is unstable, doesn't have a stable base. This is kind of Buddha's fundamental teaching, and it kind of Buddhism's sort of unique assertion about especially about the nature of suffering and our suffering, our dissatisfying experiences, that they're all rooted in this fundamental ignorance, which is the root of samsara. So therefore, in relation to the clarity of the mind, that clarity of the mind is not something negative, it's not something positive, it's just neutral. But all of the negative experiences that we have, the Buddha is saying they all arise from a fundamental misconception, and therefore that's another reason that they can be cleared away, right? So one reason is that because the nature of the fundamental basis of our experiences are mind, and none of our experiences are in the nature of the mind. So therefore, everything that arises in our experience eventually can pass away, be cleared away, because it's not in the nature of the base of experience, the mind. But then a second reason that we can eliminate suffering fundamentally from the root is that, whenever I talk about how we can eliminate suffering totally, I often think about this Mind Life conference that happened in Balakupe, in Serije Monastery, where I've spent in the last 20 years. We had a Mind Life conference once. His Holiness came and many scientists came. They were discussing. But there was this one Russian scientist who was kind of saying, well, the Russian attitude is that, suffering is just a fundamental part of life. So you should just get used to it. It's kind of a pipe dream. It's kind of fantasy to think that you'll ever be free from it. So the attitude is much more like that, which is, if that's the case, then that is the best approach. Just get used to it. But we have to ask, well, is it really possible to be free from suffering completely? Because it does seem kind of like maybe improbable thing. But that's why it's important. To understand, as if if one's interested in Buddhism and the Buddhist view, to understand what are the reasons that the Buddha says we can be completely free from all forms of suffering. So one is the clear knowing nature of the mind, that the mind is not in the nature of any form of suffering. But the second reason, and maybe more significant reason, is that because all suffering arises from a fundamental misconception of how things actually exist. And so when we develop wisdom, the right view, correct view of how we exist, how other things exist, then that eliminates all suffering. So then is it possible though, because I guess another doubt that comes up is, well, if no appearance or experience is in the nature of the mind, then how can we say that, if we eliminate all suffering and achieve nirvana, freedom from samsara, that we can abide in a state of kind of joy and bliss, complete enjoyment, like forever. Because that wouldn't that also be temporary and so not lasting forever? Well, the difference is that state of nirvana, a state of independence upon wisdom, um, eliminating all ignorance. Then that wisdom, knowing the truth itself, brings a kind of satisfaction. Right? So when you correctly know reality as it is, it's like this incredible kind of beauty of the way things are, the way you exist, the way all things exist, and knowing that correctly, and knowing that the way you know is correct. And I kind of related again to math also, like when I was a student studying, I think maybe more in like algebra, some of the equations, they're so beautiful the way they work, or geometry. Like you, and especially like you get a math problem, and then you at first it's very difficult, you don't understand, and it's not clear at all. But then you think about it, work on it, experiment a little bit, and then finally you figure out the way the equation works, and it has a kind of beauty, and there's a kind of joy that comes with seeing, understanding that something that you didn't understand before, and then you kind of work hard. It's almost like the harder you work, the more joy there is when you finally understand. And then you understand it, and the whole thing kind of fits into place. And there's a kind of joy that goes with that. So I think in Buddhism we say that it's possible to achieve a state of nirvana, or even full enlightenment is higher than that, where you abide in this state of kind of unending happiness, satisfaction, well-being. Then that's possible because even though it's true that none of those things are in the nature of the mind, but the mind's nature is to know, is to perceive and realize things. So then, once you realize like the fundamental truth of reality, of yourself and other phenomena, the way it is, the way they do exist, and I think the case is that becomes um, a stable source of joy, of satisfaction, that experience of knowing. Mm. And then on top of that, of course, to achieve full enlightenment depends upon having infinite compassion and loving kindness for sentient beings, which is another like huge source of joy and satisfaction. So if you continually abiding in infinite, kindness, caring about others, selflessly caring about others, that itself becomes kind of an unending source of joy, and it's mixed with wisdom. So it's a very stable base. I don't know. That was a bit of a digression. I wasn't planning to talk about. Let's start with a little meditation. Focus our attention a bit, and then generate a positive motivation for the session. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. And then gradually start to focus your attention on an object of placement meditation. You can either use the breath as an object, or if you like, you can use the conventional nature of the mind, that which is clear and knowing. Just observing your own mind as an object of placement meditation, or another object if you're familiar with one. So for about 2 minutes, we'll just practice placement meditation. Mhm. And then let's generate a positive motivation for this session. So remembering that this session is on attachment, looking at attachment, its nature, the faults of attachment, um, and then looking at especially antidotes, trying to recognize and learn to practice some of the different antidotes to attachment. So in light of that, then generating a motivation, maybe it's helpful to can look at your own life, um, your own experiences, or look at the experience of others or the world in general. Look at all the problems. Think for a minute or so about all the different problems that arise from attachment. From alcohol abuse or drug addiction to so many forms of violence. You know, domestic abuse or in romantic relationships can lead to violence. And there's disagreements or between parents and children. Parents being attached to the children, do what they want to do. Children being attached to doing what they want to do. And then, violence between countries. Mhm. And then just basic personal arguments, conflicts. Mhm. Anyway, think for a minute about so many problems in our lives, in the world, arise from, um, you know, each of us as individuals being attached to what we want, and then that leading to disregard for the interest of others, the well-being of others, the views and concerns of others, and then leads into harming one another in different ways. It just leads to so much mental suffering in general for the person who has attachment. So then let's generate a motivation that by whatever we do during this session, may it become a kind of solution, relief to all those different forms of suffering that arise from attachment. Uh, and by engaging in this session on attachment and antidotes to attachment, contentment and satisfaction, having few desires, then may we and all beings in the world be completely free of all the suffering that arises from attachment, and then the root affliction itself. And abide in a state of well-being and happiness beyond attachment, and eventually achieve a state of full liberation from samsara and full enlightenment. Whatever way makes sense for you to generate a positive motivation for this session. Try to generate that. And then if you like, you can generate the mind of refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. Usually at the beginning of a Buddhist session, we go for refuge to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. I mean, I'll recite Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra 3 times as a way of going for refuge. So if you're familiar with, you can join it. So, mm, the first thing to look at when you look at attachment, well, there's a pattern to, in general. Well, I guess maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. So in Buddhism, you can divide up all of Buddha's teachings and practice, um, kind of all of Buddhism into three different kind of parts. Usually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama usually speaks about this or spoke about this for many years. So on the one hand, there's Buddhist philosophy. When we talk about like um, kind of more intellectual kind of aspect of Buddhism, like the view of reality, emptiness, the nature of things. Um, that all compounded phenomena are impermanent, all phenomena are selfless and empty. Um, yeah, when we talk about kind of the fundamental nature of things, um, that's more to do with like Buddhist philosophy. But then there's Buddhist psychology, is when we look more about like the nature of the mind, how our mind works, the different aspects of the mind, and then especially positive and negative emotions that arise, positive and negative thoughts, identifying positive thoughts and trying to increase them, and identifying destructive thoughts and emotions and trying to reduce those. That's more to do with Buddhist psychology. And so there's Buddhist philosophy. I guess philosophy would also include more like the worldview when we talk about kind of the cosmos and what exists, what doesn't exist, more to do with philosophy. And then what things more to do with, what are negative and positive states of mind, how to reduce the one, increase the other. It's more to do with psychology. And then to do with like, visualization and symbolisms and different rituals and prayers. There's the Buddhist religion. Right, so you can divide up Buddhism into those three parts: the kind of religious aspect, the psychology aspect, and then the philosophical aspect. And as someone engaging with Buddhism, it's not like you have to take it all together or leave it all behind. You can pick and choose which parts you're interested in and you want to use in your own practice. All right, so and then within those, some people prefer to spend more time engaging with like religious practice and rituals and prayers. Some people prefer to spend more time looking at the philosophy and reading books about Buddhist philosophy and the views. And then some, probably most actually, find the most benefit from the Buddhist psychology aspects of how we deal with how we transform our mind in a constructive way. So today, this session on attachment is mostly to do with Buddhist psychology. Okay. So then, in general, one of the things I find most helpful about the Buddhist approach to a kind of psychology, like dealing with the mind, is that there's a big emphasis on like being very clear about the meaning of things, the definition of things. So here, when we look at attachment, the first thing we'll do is ask the question, well, what is attachment? Exactly what is it? What are the different defining characteristics that distinguish attachment from like anger or jealousy or arrogant pride or afflictive doubt, other afflictive emotions? And then try to identify those in our own experience. And then identify, well, what are the causes that give rise to attachment? And then based on that, understanding the nature of attachment itself and the causes that give rise to it, then we have a good start to see, well, how can we reduce attachment? What can we do to decrease the power of it and gradually undermine the causes for attachment and gradually eliminate it, right? So generally in Buddhism, whatever you're looking at and in our own practice, whenever we realize like there's something that's disturbing our mind, some disturbing thought or disturbing emotion that's arising again and again in our mind, like that's kind of the one of the best approaches is first try to look carefully at that specific thing that's disturbing your mind and try to define it and understand its nature. What is it? And then understand its causes. What's giving rise to it? And then once you understand its nature, because like I was saying earlier, any instance of mind, it has an object, right? And it engages that object in different ways. So different disturbing emotions. I mean, they each moment, each instance of a disturbing emotion has an object, and then they engage with that object in a certain way. And disturbing emotions, because a disturbing emotion, or this is translation of a Tibetan term, nyomo, which means, mm, well, mong means to like obscure, kind of like fog obscures your view. If you're on the beach and looking out and the fog comes in, it's like a mukba really, but you can't see anything anymore, right? It slowly impairs your ability to see things. So disturbing emotions, one, they cloud the mind, they impair the mind. Um, we'll look at it a bit later with attachment. So they impair our ability to see things clearly. But also yin means like, actually it's related to nyomba, which means crazy. So they also like make our mind kind of crazy. Like um, they make us think and do things which in a clear, like neutral, kind of level-headed state of mind we maybe wouldn't do. So with disturbing emotions, there's always very mild instances and then very, intense instances. So maybe, with very mild attachment, it doesn't look like it's very crazy, but if you're totally like overwhelmed with attachment, then you might well, do things and say things that you wouldn't normally do. With anger is very easy to see, right? Anger is the strongest and the most distorting of all the afflictive emotions. Um, but even very mild instances of anger can seem quite innocent, right? Justifiable. Mm. So yeah, but maybe I was thinking before we look at the definition of attachment, it's good. Just I wanted to make sure you're all kind of you can see some of the faults. Like in the motivation, I mentioned some of the faults of attachment. Like the obvious one is like addiction to drugs or alcohol or addiction to anything. Addictions are all forms of attachment, right? Um, so think about like an addiction to drugs or alcohol, like the mind, that's the mind. So well, maybe I should back up a little bit more again. So I wanted to mention this before I move on that so I was talking about this word nyomo, which is translated as like Nyomong in Tibetan, which has kind of crazy and clouds the mind. Okay, these two aspects. So that's kind of like the nature of it's translated in English as like afflictive emotion, delusion, distorted emotion, destructive emotions. So yeah. So basically what it means is like instances of anger and attachment are the two fundamental ones. Ignorance is also kind of distorted understanding of things. There's one specific form of ignorance that's the root of those two, but then also afflicted doubt, arrogant pride, jealousy as another form. So what's the common about all those is that when they arise in our mind, they disturb the peace of the mind. They all disturb our peace of mind. So that's the fundamental nature of an afflictive emotion. Like emotions are not bad; they're very positive emotions, like joy, kindness, and generosity, awe. But and so when those think of like joy, when joy arises in the mind, it can bring sort of excitement, but it doesn't disturb the peace of the mind, right? The mind it feels excited, but like content, peaceful as well. Um, Whereas when anger arises in the mind, that's the most obvious one, then the mind feels disturbed, agitated, ill at ease. We feel like we have to do something or change something, or else, things won't be right. There's a dissatisfaction with the way we are. Whereas like when joy arises in the mind, we kind of just wish like, oh, I wish this would last forever. We don't want anything to change. We want to stay in that state of mind. Whereas when any afflictive emotion then arises in the mind, it makes us feel like, kind of like we have a thorn stuck in us somewhere. Like something has to change. I don't want to be like this, right? So in the case of anger, it's like the mind of anger observes an object and sees exaggerates the negative aspects and wants to get rid of it. So in the case of anger, when it arises in the mind, we feel like there's something bad that's happening that I have to eliminate, right? Whereas in the case of attachment, it's like the opposite. Attachment observes its object and exaggerates the positive, the attractive features of the object, the pleasant features, and then wants to possess, wants to get it. So attachment, the way it disturbs the mind is it makes us dissatisfied with the way things are now and gives us a feeling like we have to have something more than what we have now. And so that's the way it causes us to like want to change the situation. So if you go back to like addiction, it doesn't even have to be like, illegal addiction. No, just we can be addicted to like coffee, our morning coffee, or reading the newspaper in the morning. Yeah. And at one time I was staying at someone's house, and there's a husband and wife. They invited me to stay at their house for a couple of days while I was teaching at a center nearby. And it was like Sunday morning. I think I didn't have to teach that morning, or I had a few hours free. So usually at that time, that was like, I don't know, 12 years ago. And I didn't, when I was in the monastery, I didn't have access to like a nice newspaper sometimes. So this was in India. So I came down to the living room in the morning about, I don't know, 8:30 or so after I finished my prayers. And there's this nice copy of the New York Times sitting on the coffee table, like fresh in that morning paper. So I sat down and opened up the paper and on the couch and started reading, having a cup of tea. But then the husband came down, and I think he usually reads the newspaper every morning. And there I was reading his newspaper, and I could feel he didn't say anything, but you sat on a chair nearby. I could feel like kind of he was not happy that I'm sitting there reading his newspaper. No? So, I mean, it's kind of addiction, like wanting, something a little pleasant something you do every morning, like reading the paper, having a cup of coffee, sitting in a particular place, which it might seem, I mean, it's quite innocuous. But then when something blocks you from getting that, that's when you see you have that you have that craving for that something. If we didn't relate to it with that kind of distorted way that there's a feeling of need for that thing, then when we're prevented from having it, it would be okay. Right? It wouldn't disturb the mind. But it's because we crave something that then when we're prevented from having it, it gives rise to anger. So any instance of anger always arises from an afflicted desire that precedes it, attachment. Any instance of anger always arises from attachment. Maybe we can spend some time looking at that a bit later. But so looking at just some faults of attachment, one obvious is a kind of addiction, like alcohol, the drug addiction, or in a kind of addictive way of relating to any pleasure that we experience. Mm-hmm. So look at that what do we do in the case of like, well, look at the obvious instance of like addiction to drugs. Then there's a mind that observes that drug or alcohol, whatever, cigarettes, and it exaggerates the ability of that thing to please us, to satisfy us, right? So it looks exclusively at the pleasing aspects of that, So if we're addicted to, I don't know, some drug, then when we think about it, we think about only we don't think about all the problems it causes me and how it's destroying my life and how it's destroying my health. That doesn't appear to the mind of attachment, right? What appears is how good I feel when I have it, how much I enjoy it, the kind of nice sensations and nice experiences it brings. And then we exaggerate those. Make them actually seem much more pleasant and enjoyable than they actually are. And we exaggerate them in a way that they kind of over or outshine any of the negative aspects of that drug in this case. But all these features are the same with relation to a person. When we're attached to another person or attached to a reputation, we can be attached to praise, attached to food, clothes, money, power. Anything is the same. So the nature of attachment is such that it's a mind. It observes an object, generally a contaminated phenomena. It means an object which is in the nature of suffering. But that's, yeah, kind of a big story I won't get into. But basically attachment observes an object. It focuses exclusively on the appealing aspects of the object. And it exaggerates those appealing aspects. So think about, when you fell in love with someone in high school for the first time, and the way the person appears to you is just like they're an angel, or they're just like, kind of a god. They kind of seem to radiate and be, really attractive, and everything you do is kind of intelligent or funny or, just perfect. But that only lasts a few months, right? And then as you get to know the person, the view starts to change. So attachment observes an object, focuses exclusively on the pleasant aspects of the object, exaggerates those, is totally blind to any kind of negative aspects of the object, unattractive aspects of the object. And I feel like there's something on this. Oh yeah, and attachment also, so it exaggerates the positive qualities of the object, and then projects on the object that object of our attachment has the ability to please me, has the ability to satisfy me, to bring me like happiness and well-being. So we project that attachment, projects that onto the object. That object, if I can have it, then I'll be happy. We have that false notion. If I can possess the object of my attachment, the thing of attachment, whether it's drugs or money or praise or being with another person, then I'll be happy. And kind of indirectly is telling us if I can't have that object, I won't be happy. Right? So it's putting all this expectation. There's this unrealistic, is projecting this unrealistic expectation onto the object of our attachment. Right? That if I can, that object, from the side of the object, it can satisfy me. I mean, and also when I was saying we look at the mind of attachment, the way it sees the object is as being only attractive, only good, only nice and pleasant. It also looks like most of the pleasantness that we see in another person or the drug or something is from the side of our mind. But the way it appears to the mind of attachment is the attractiveness is from the side of the object. Right? Think about like a food. Like with food, it's very easy to see this. Like think about a food that you really like. No. So yeah, I just had some very nice sweet potato fries at Zamin's in Santa Cruz the other day. They're very good. So I really like sweet potatoes. But my being, seeing the sweet potato fries is like really attractive. But that's because I really like sweet potatoes. So my really liking sweet potatoes, where does that come from? Does that come from the sweet potatoes or from my mind? It's from my mind. No, the sweet potatoes don't cause me to like them. No, it's kind of my reaction to, and my reaction to is because I like sweet. And because I grew up when I was growing up, my mom and dad would make nice sweet potatoes, and I was habituated to it. So from the side of my mind, then when I observe sweet potato fries, it looks like, oh, they're really delicious sweet potato fries, and the deliciousness of the sweet potato fries is coming from the side of the object. But it's totally not. It's coming from the side of my mind. And the reasoning that helps us see this really clearly is that if, the deliciousness, so think of whatever food, you have some attachment to. So think of that. So, and does it, well, first of all, just ask the question, does it appear? So bring to mind, like the mind that observes that food and thinks about how delicious it is, how enjoyable it is. Or drink. So is it true that to that mind, it appears like, the object, the food or drink you're thinking of, that appears like it's delicious from the side of the object? No? Is that the way it appears? Mm. So then if the object of our attachment, in this case of food, it was kind of delicious from its own side, from the side of the object, then that means that that deliciousness is a quality of the object. So that means whoever experiences that object experiences that quality, that deliciousness. But I'm sure, like, not everybody tastes sweet potato fries and thinks delicious. Huh. Some people probably taste them and think, no, fries should be salty, not hot and salty, not sweet. Huh? And they don't like. So whatever food you can think of, some people will like it and some people won't like it, right? Which means that it's being delicious or being enjoyable is not from the side of the object.
Is that always the case then?
Well, try to pose a counterexample. Do you have a counterexample?
I don't know if you can like ice cream. It's something that is objectively liked by all, whether or not they think they should have it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Does everybody you think everybody likes ice cream?
I don't know.
No.
We can take a survey.
Yeah.
Is there anyone in the room that doesn't like ice cream?
That was my object in my
Ice cream was your object?
Hot Fudge Sunday.
Yeah.
I prefer other desserts.
You prefer other desserts. Okay, thank you. Yeah. No.
Oh, I don't like our desserts.
I lived in Taiwan one year. There people hardly eat ice cream though.
Yeah.
It's not so popular. Like in China, because a lot of people don't have exactly lactose
But
issues.
objectively, whether they had lactose issues or not, objectively, if they didn't have the lactose issues, would they like it? Is it inherently good and tasty to all, whether or not that's good for their body or their
Yeah.
I'm
But,
thinking,
Well,
sorry, I'm thinking about this from like an evolutionary biology standpoint. Like, y- we are, we inherit this desire for sweet things and fatty things, but not all animals have that. So like cats can't taste sweet things. They might like ice cream because it's fatty, but they won't like something that's just sugar. So
right. That's a good example. Yeah. So actually the when we experience the sweetness and that's a pleasant experience, that's actually a reaction of between the ice cream and our taste. Like think about it biologically.
yeah.
Between our taste buds, and then our opinion of that. Well, that's a pleasant experience, which it might be somewhat hardwired for some people, but definitely for other animals, it's not. But if that ability to give that delicious experience was a property of the ice cream itself, then it's like cold, like ice cream. Ice cream is of the nature of being cold because it's ice. I mean, if it's not cold, it's not ice cream, right? So the coldness is the nature. It's like from the side of the object. It is a quality of the ice cream itself. So whether even someone who doesn't like ice cream, a cat, an animal, they will all experience it as cold. That's not going to vary, right? But whether they experience it as delicious or not will vary. And then within that, different flavors of ice cream, right? But that's exactly what you have to do, no? And in Buddhist teachings, like that's how you should approach. Try to find counterexamples to what's being taught, to us, because that's the way you go deeper into understanding the thing, and you kind of make it, you generate your own understanding. Yeah. Any other questions about that so far? Yes.
I'm curious about when there's a mixed attachment, like there's an aversion and an attachment at the same time for a certain object.
Well, yeah, actually, I don't think there would be. I mean, you can try to give me an example that shows that, but generally, like there can be a mind can change extremely fast, right? So in one moment we could be attached. Like you're probably, I mean, the example that comes to mind for me is thinking about in relation to a person. Because oftentimes the people we get most angry or irritated with are people we care about the most, right? And so in that situation, like in one moment you can be really caring about them, and then the next moment you'd be really, irritated with the person. But the mind that is caring about the person that in that moment, that mind itself is not irritated. And then the mind that is irritated in the next moment, that mind itself is not like liking, you know. So one moment of mind, and here we're looking at, you know, split seconds. In split seconds, our minds can change, but we try to dissect, you know, at a very fine level. So when we observe a person and we're seeing something positive about them and liking that, that can switch in the next moment to seeing something negative and disliking that, right? So they can alternate very back and forth very quickly, but it wouldn't be the same mind in the exact same moment, right? So does that answer your question?
It makes sense. It does answer. Yeah. There are other questions I have, but I think we dump them out.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, remember them for later though. Yeah, I would like, yeah, maybe before we discuss more questions, maybe I would like to just kind of finish this, filling out this picture of what attachment is, and then we spend some time just trying to see in our own experience some very good examples of it. So, yeah, so we're almost finished though. So again, attachment is a mind that observes an object, and the object can be all different things. We can be attached to ourself, we can be attached to our body, to our own reputation, you know, to our possessions. We can be attached, of course, to, you know, other people, objects that we don't have, things we want, something in the future, something in the past. I mean, we can be, you know, there's kind of no end to the objects of attachment. So the mind of attachment observes an object, exaggerates focuses exclusively on the attractive aspects of that object, exaggerates those, and then and exaggerates the ability of the object to give us pleasure, and then and also it feels that the ability of the object to give us pleasure is from the side of the object, right? And all the attractive features we see are from the side of the object. And then, so this is the part I didn't get to. And then it craves to possess the object. So attachment is kind of craving to possess, like if it's a, you know, I don't know, like food, to enjoy the food. If it's a reputation, to have other people think that about us. If it's, you know, like our body, for our body to be in a certain way, to control it and make it to be a certain way. So whatever we're attached to, it's like our mind becomes fixated with that and kind of wants to be conjoined with it. It's like there's kind of a grasping energy. We want to possess, to be closer to have that and not be separated from it. And then also it becomes, so here again, you can see in very strong case of attachment, it becomes like we can't pull our attention away from it. This one you can especially see when you're attached to another person. Then you think about the person, and it's like attachment is like, one example or analogy for it is like oil and soaked into cloth. When oil is in cloth, it's very difficult to separate it out from the cloth. So, I mean, you could think of that analogy in two ways. One way is when we're attached to an object, then the mind goes to it again and again and again. We have a different, you know, it's like we craving about it. So again, like with a drug addict, it's very, you know, alcoholic, they're thinking about, you know, when can I, you know, get that again? When can I have the next drink again and again? It comes to mind. Or when we're attached to a person, we think about the person again and again, right? And also it's very, and so, but also it's very, when we're attached to an object, it's very different. Attachment is very difficult to eliminate. It's very difficult to reduce because it's pleasant. You know, there's a lot of pleasant experience that goes with it. There's a disturbing aspect, so that's why we need to eliminate it, because it does disturb the mind. Because as long as we don't get the object of attachment, we feel there's this, I mean, but the disturbance, that the way attachment disturbs the mind is much more subtle than the way anger disturbs the mind. When we get angry, obviously we're really disturbed. We're unhappy in the moment. But when we have attachment, there's some kind of pleasure that goes with it, although there's an underlying kind of sense of being impoverished. not having something. It causes a mind of like being impoverished, like not having, and then we're dissatisfied with that, right? And also it leads to a kind of low self-esteem where we feel like, and this is why, especially like in a very consumeristic society, like in the United States, there's this hyper kind of economy driven by consumerism, and there's all these messages from advertising that, to have a good life, have a satisfying life, we need to buy things, right? Because that's good for the GDP. So we so we have to buy things, so advertisers try to convince us to buy things. I know when I was growing up, I still do a little bit. I don't know, have some kind of karma that even though I've never really been in like a independent business person, I worked a little bit in different jobs like before I became a monk. But I often would daydream about like, well, if I wanted to start a business, like what kind of product would I make? But then it gets into, well, then I have to convince other people to buy the product. Like people have to buy the product. But then half the time it's like, but they don't really need that. But I have to convince them to buy it because otherwise I won't have a business. I won't make any money. So anyway, that's the way advertising works. They convince us to buy stuff, half of which like we don't really need. Like I saw just an advertisement the other day in the New York Times, my phone for like the pillow, like the gift that I think they promoted it this year is like the gift that you can't do without this Christmas season, something. It was like there's some kind of pillow. You couldn't even see the pillow in the ad. There's just I don't know. But anyway, some kind of pillow. I don't know what's up with the pillow. I didn't look. But there's some kind of special pillow that everyone must give to their friend this Christmas season. But advertisers convince us that well, indirectly. I mean, I don't know if they're intentionally trying to do that, but they convince us. It's kind of messaging, giving this messaging that to be happy, we have to have this product. We have to eat at McDonald's, we have to drink Coke, we have to have Nike shoes, we have to have Ray-Ban sunglasses, and da 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 da. And so, but indirectly, that's telling us that you yourself, you don't have a source of happiness like within you, which is very low. It's a very low view of a person, that the person themselves, they can't be happy. To be happy, they need things from outside, need other things. So that's attachment. I mean, that's the kind of the real dark side of attachment. So you can see with like, drug addict, alcohol addict, kind of clear. They have this feeling like, I mean, and then it's all kind of related with the whole biological reaction to chemicals, right? Which is really overwhelms the mind, right? But the mind of attachment is kind of like by looking at object of attachment, seeing it in such a positive way, and then exaggerating that, feeling like that positive appearance is from the side of the object, and the object has the ability to satisfy me. The flip side of that is indirectly the mind is thinking, I don't have a source of satisfaction within myself, right? Which is very low, very kind of low, tragic kind of view of oneself. And it's also not true. And as long as we think that, because the only thing that can really satisfy us in the long term is from within us. So attachment totally blinds us to the thing that can bring us real long-term satisfaction, right? So in that way, it clouds the mind, it obscures the mind. And you can see when you give rise to attachment, you don't think clearly. So, okay. So that's basically all the definition. So I'll just try to condense it in a few words, and then we spend some time reflecting on it ourselves. And then we'll spend some time on the antidotes. Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and get comfortable in your meditation posture and start to bring your mind within. Bring your attention within and try to think of object of attachment. Why don't you try to think of some objects of attachment? So don't start with the one that is the thing you're most strongly attached to, right? Because there's a danger it just overwhelms the mind. So start with a kind of mild form. A mild form of attachment that you have. So you want it to be strong enough that you can clearly see it, but weak enough that you can still be objective about how you look at it, right? That it doesn't just flood your mind with craving. So think about the object of attachment and then try to, get a very clear perception of it and see how, it appears to you, how you relate to it. So then we try to compare our experience of whatever attachment we have to this kind of definition. So the mind of attachment observes an object and exaggerates. So first of all, exaggerates well, focuses exclusively on the pleasant aspects of the object, and is totally blind to anything negative about it. So is that the case? And then exaggerates the pleasant aspects of the object and exaggerates their ability to give us satisfaction, to give us happiness. So check if that's the case in your experience. And it feels that the attractiveness we see in the object is from the side of the object. It's not from the side of one's own mind. So is that the case? And then finally, the mind of attachment kind of longs for the object. It wants to be conjoined with or to possess, to have and enjoy the object, and has a difficult time like tearing its attention away. So it becomes kind of locked into thinking about, paying attention to that object. So is that the case in your experience? So now if there's any questions about that part, we can discuss. So does it match your experience or not? There should, yeah. It should be mostly kind of matching, but maybe some questions arising about where it doesn't seem to match. You all have attachment? Yes.
I think this session is all dedication to the ego. You could only eliminate the guy, ego. We wouldn't have to talk about this, right?
If we could eliminate the ego,
Ego.
that's true, yeah.
And I see it as that dragon that we have to go and slay, right? But
Yeah.
it have to be with a sword. It can be, there's many ways to skin a cat. There's
Yeah.
many ways to get rid of that ego, right? So you have to find your own way.
That's true. And there's many different ways to find your own way. So if you prefer to go take a walk in the woods or something and slay your ego, you can do that.
I
But
do that all the time here.
huh? Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah. But it's also important. I mean, well, I mean, do you think it's helpful to look at attachment at all or no?
Sure. Yeah, it's also one thing that came to mind is the saying, sure you've heard is Buddhist saying, even though enlightenment is unattainable, unattainable, without to attain it, right?
No. The Buddha didn't say enlightenment is unattainable.
That's the Zen Buddhist. Okay.
No, enlightenment is attainable. No, actually, also the Buddha said, I mean, looking at attachment, I was just looking at quotes this morning. There's one quote from the Pali Canon where the Buddha said, all suffering arises from attachment. Like the suffering is the root of attachment. That's according to the Pali Canon. The Sanskrit canon, we don't accept that. But the reason he said that is because most of our ordinary problems in everyday life are related to attachment. So it's important to understand and try to reduce attachment. But by reducing attachment, you already start to reduce the ego. You start to understand of how the ego works and how the ego relates to objects. So the ego, yeah, it's like a big dragon. You can't just eliminate it all at once. You have to kind of be very skillful. So you start to reduce attachment, or start to reduce anger, start to understand, jealousy, arrogant pride, and then gradually you get to the root, which is self-grasping, and then you eliminate from the root. But just to start to try to eliminate directly the root right away before the branches, yeah, some people can, a few people can, but it's more difficult. It's like cutting down a huge tree. If you cut down one of these big redwood trees, if you just cut it right from the base, it's probably going to cause a big mess, and maybe kill someone. So you first cut the branches and the top, and then gradually cut it down to a size where it's safe to cut down the whole tree. So with our ego, it's like that. Actually, there's many. The way the Buddha taught about uprooting the ego is, I mean, some people he wouldn't even teach about it because for most of us, it's a very scary thing. It's just like dying. For most of us, dying is a very scary thing. So you want to think about it gradually before you die so that you're prepared for it. But just to eliminate the ego, for most of us, if we really could do that in a moment, we would be really disturbed because it's something we grasp onto so strongly. So you kind of start reducing gradually. Yeah.
And to start off the question,
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I was thinking about that because that's why it's so important to define attachment so that we can distinguish it from a wholesome desire. Because getting rid of attachment doesn't mean getting rid of any one enjoyment of ordinary things. We can enjoy life. We can enjoy people. We can enjoy our bodies. We can enjoy, ice cream and the sweet potato fries and everything. but in regard to like higher things like enlightenment, liberation, just being a better person, we can have desire for those things. That's not wrong. But that's why it's so important to define attachment so you can distinguish from like desire. So like, you can have desire for enlightenment, and then, if you can have attachment to enlightenment, that is a bit of a question. But But the main thing is to look at is the way you relate to that, does it disturb your mind? Right? So with enlightenment, you can have a wholesome desire to become enlightened, to be a better person, to help all sentient beings. And that can be something when you think of it brings peace and satisfaction and inspiration and energy. It kind of brings some kind of wholesomeness to your mind that supports your other wholesome attitudes. But you can also think of enlightenment in a way that's totally ego-driven. That's totally egoistic. So when you think of enlightenment, then if it causes you to be like craving and grasping, and then if someone else tells you, oh, enlightenment's not possible, you get angry about it. If it gives rise to anger and irritation, then the way you're relating to it is distorted, right? So generally, it's just like it's kind of similar to a lot of times when people learn about attachment, have the question, well, can you still care about other people? Or do you just have to be this kind of, neutral piece of wood or something? Aloof, kind of unfeeling person? No. You can still care about other people and be kind to other people and have, enjoy other people, and all different kind of relationships with other people. We can enjoy all that. But then if we see that the danger is what we have to see, the way I think about them, then when they act or something happens that I don't like, do I react with anger? Anger always shows us our attachment. Whenever we get irritated that someone does something or something, it shows that we're attached to something else. Which brings me actually to there's another quote I wanted to mention I found. It was very helpful because one thing we see we're so attached to, which is not discussed so much, is our views, our opinions. So there's another quote from the Pali Canon where the Buddha said, "Those attached to perceptions and views roam the world offending people." Right? So I'll read it again. Those attached to perceptions and views, so those attached to their own opinions, their own perceptions of way things are, like who's good and who's bad and what's great, what's not, what's terrible. So those are attached to their perceptions and views, their own views about anything, they roam the world offending people. Right? So they go around and they meet with people and then they offend people. You think of like someone who's really opinionated, has really like strong views, and then to talk with a person is like really difficult because whatever you say, you're afraid they're going to have some view that's against that, and they're going to get upset and then start like hammering you for saying something that disagrees with their opinion. So with our own, and that's a form of attachment. Those attached to their perceptions and views. We can have views and strong opinions for something, but they should be backed up, they should be based on reason. Attachment is always blind. It's not based on reason. Like I was thinking, well, I don't know, are there other questions before I carry on? Yes.
Can you be attached to positive things like silence or the ritual that you meditate at that point? I mean, I know you shouldn't be a slave of your good habits, but I think that would be the attachment. But it could be also maybe overwhelming that you are attached to it.
Yeah, you can be attached to positive things. Like, when we're meditating, that's a big one, is being attached to silence. Being attached to like there not being disturbance in the environment. And again, the way you can see that is if there's someone makes noise, like there's a dog barking and someone walks by and you start to get irritated, that shows you're attached to. You're attached to it. You're relating. Of course, it is good to have silence and be undisturbed, but the way we relate to that should be we appreciate, we like, but if also for some reason it's not there, we can also accept that. We can be okay with that. So it's just like another person that we really like. We see a lot of good things. We enjoy being around them. But if we're attached, then when we can't be around them, then our mind gets upset and disturbed. But if we're not attached, then for whatever reason we can't be, we're planning to meet them, but then it doesn't happen, we can't meet them. Our mind is okay also to be, we enjoy being with them, but we're also okay to not to be with them. Like that shows we have a healthy kind of way of relating to the person. Right? Yeah.
On the line of the attachment, having needs is different from being attached to it. In order to be healthy, being attached, we do have needs. you know, it often anger arises from any time that because of hungry, that to not be hungry, to not be, you know, long.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. We have needs. We have biological needs. We have emotional needs. We have social needs. Yeah, we have needs, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having needs. But you're saying anger arises when our needs are not met. Like, can you give an example?
Like if you were expecting to get some food and then you didn't, and you're hungry, and the anger and the hunger kind of are related.
Yeah. So, okay. So imagine, you've been working all day, you're really hungry, someone agreed to bring you a meal, and then they didn't. And then you don't have food and you get angry about it, right?
And like not being able to afford food or like not having that.
Okay, well okay. So, and then being angry about not being able to afford food. But the thing is, see, the anger, again, I would say it's arising from attachment. It's because if you can't afford food or someone agrees to bring food and you don't get it, can you imagine a person who doesn't get angry about that? Yeah. So the person who doesn't get angry about it, why is it one person would get angry about it and one person wouldn't? No? Yeah, because the one person is really attached to that happening. They're placing all this expectation on being able to afford food or someone else bringing me food, as they said. And in one way, is it justified or not? That's a different question. But is it helpful or not is maybe the more productive question to ask. So if someone doesn't bring you food, to get angry about it is not going to help the situation at all. No, it's going to make you unhappy, and it's going to make that person never want to try to help you again. No. Or even if you can't afford food, or imagine you can't afford food like to feed your family or something, which is really tragic situation. And it's kind of, in the ordinary way of thinking, it's justifiable to be upset about this situation. But being upset about this situation, is that going to help you make money to feed your family or help you get food? No. What's going to help? I mean, the more logical reaction is think, well, okay, what do I do now? What's the solution to this? I need food. What can I do to get food? No, getting upset and getting angry about it is generally not going to help. I mean, I say generally because, yeah, there are some situations where we do need to recognize injustice and react very strongly and forcefully in the face of that, like stand up to what's, something that's wrong, and protest. But we should still, in that case, we should try to do so, because anger is a mind that wants to harm someone else. So in any case, harming someone else is never going to help, like, resolve the problem. No? But so that there's a difference, just like there's a difference between attachment and like desire. There's a difference between kind of outrage and anger. Like outrage can be justified. Anger is not justified, because anger always involves wanting to harm, right? Desire means like you see something, you see the positive qualities about it, you want it. That's okay. But attachment is a step further where you feel like I can't be without it. I need it. And to be satisfied, I have to have that. No. So it becomes like this. This distorted exaggeration of just healthy desire. Right. So it's not different. It's not so easy to see the difference, but that's what we need to try to do to understand attachment. One thing can help. So this is what I want. Oh, you had a question.
Well, it's very
Sorry.
similar, actually, like about the essentials, right? Like it's about a mother needing to feed a child, right? Or it's about food in general, like the air, like breathing, the things that we need for survival purposes. Like how to, like that, there's an attachment there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up that example, because that's where a lot of confusion comes from. I mean, first of all, that's an excellent example. So of like, well, don't we need attachment to survive? Our survival is based upon our mother caring for us. Why did our mother care for us? Because she's attached to us. So if we didn't have attachment, wouldn't like all mothers, if everybody just gave up attachment, like the Buddha is saying, wouldn't all mothers stop caring for their children and then our species would die out? I mean, no, that's a kind of ridiculous exaggeration of the question, but it is that thinking about, well, because it's such a, I mean, in Buddhism, actually, the way a mother or a father, a parent cares for their children is held up as like, the highest example of how we should care about others, how we should care about any other sentient being, right? So, well, I know the way the term attachment is used in Western psychology is completely different than what we're talking about here, right? In Western psychology, or psychology, this attachment describes more like this affection of one person for another, right? Without distinguishing between something that's distorted and destructive and something that's healthy. I think it's all kind of lumped together. I'm not clear about the definition actually, but in Western psychology, I should look up. If someone knows, anyone know? Any psychologists here?
Styles.
Attachment styles. What does that mean?
They're just like avoidant or
Avoidance styles versus attachment styles.
ancient styles, pure styles. So it's
Mm.
like yeah.
Well, what does attachment style mean? Oh, those are all different kinds of attachment styles. Avoidance style and what? Okay.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 different ones. I think it's 4.
Well, what's the common denominator to them all that makes them attachment styles? You know?
It's actually about it's like early childhood development typically.
Right.
That
Yeah.
how you relate to your caregiver.
Right.
Set up your overall
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think the way attachment is used there, it's similar, and that's related, talking about the way like people relate to each other or kind of form a connection between each other. But here, I mean, it's quite different than what we're talking about here. It's a bit, yeah, yes.
I was wondering with both of their examples, but how does it relate to hopelessness and despair? You just find the sense of hopelessness and despair, not being able to do the child. You're not angry, but you don't know what. Is that an accident? No,
I don't think that's it. But the thing is that kind of the hopelessness, despair, kind of you're thinking about like in that, and it's helpful to stick with concrete like examples. Those are helpful. I know I'm talking a bit in the abstract to try to elicit things that are generally applicable, but it fills in so much of the picture to think about very concrete examples. So yeah, in the case of like a parent that doesn't have money to feed their children or provide for their family, and they have kind of hopeless despair. Well, think about, does it fit the definition of attachment? Is there an object the mind observes that exaggerates the positive qualities of the object? I don't really think so.
Because you're talking about a physiological need.
Yeah, basically,
at that
it
point.
seems like
Basic needs.
it's attachment concept that you're talking about it would kick in once your basic
Once
needs
needs
are
are met.
met, then we're talking about things above and beyond that.
Yeah.
When you're down in the depth of needing to meet your food.
Yeah.
Survive, yeah.
I think that's true. Yeah, I
We're
think.
talking about reasonable desires.
Yeah. I think that's kind of I think that's kind of true. There's a bunch of in the chat room here online because there's a bunch of people in the Zoom room. Let me just look
I've
at
just
this.
been transcribing the questions from the audience.
Oh, you are.
because
Those are from you. Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah. If you would like to repeat the question,
Oh.
so the Zoom room can hear it, that works too, but I'm happy to transcribe.
I think it's better you transcribe. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna we only have 8 minutes left, and we're going to look at antidotes to attachment. I can't just tell you the sickness and not give you any prescription. Yeah, but we've had a rich discussion about the meaning of attachment, so it's easy then to mention a couple antidotes. So let's meditate again. I'll just point out a few antidotes, and then you can, as you meditate, you can try applying them in real time. So bring to mind your exploration of an object of attachment earlier, and try to get a sense and try to give rise to that attachment, right? So when you meditate on an afflictive emotion and you're trying to understand it, actually you want to generate a degree of that in your mind that you can feel it as if you're feeling that. And then with a part of your mind, you look at it as an objective observer, right? So the more you can actually have a bit of attachment in your mind, then Yeah. You get a more direct experience of what it is, and then you get a more clear picture about it. Mhm. So first of all, remember we were talking about the definition of attachment. Attachment looks at exclusively the attractive features of the object. So one way, it's like lemon juice cutting through oil. One way to cut attachment is to look at the negative features of the object, right? Things that are faulty or drawbacks about um, unpleasant characteristics or unattractive aspects of the object. So just try that for a minute or two. And then another antidote, well, is related to another characteristic of attachment. So another characteristic of attachment we discussed is that in relation to the object of attachment, we have the false expectation that it will give us satisfaction, that it will fully satisfy us. So if we have it, then we'll be happy. So then we just analyze that. Is that really true? Because oftentimes things that we're attached to, we have had them in the past. We've gotten what we wanted in the past. But then that satisfaction doesn't last. No. We might be pleased initially, but then that pleasure goes away. Just like enjoying food, enjoying being with another person, drugs or alcohol. There's some momentary, short-term pleasure, enjoyment, but then it doesn't last. And then we end up, craving it more than before. So with most instances of attachment, we recognize how there's this false expectation that it will satisfy me, and then we just analyze, is that really true? Will it really satisfy me? And we can look at our past experience to see that no, that's not the case. And then that helps to reduce attachment. So try working with that antidote just for a minute or so. And then I'll just mention two other antidotes, which we don't really have time to meditate on. About out of time, but all we can think about for a minute. One is actually there's three. One is practicing contentment. So focusing on what we, instead of focusing on things that we're attracted to and we don't have, focusing on things that we already do have, and yeah, being content with just what we have. Like, so trying to reduce that feeling for needing something more. So focusing on what we do have in terms of, you know, our health, our possessions, our relationships. And well, one hand, generating kind of contentment. On the other hand, can also generate gratitude. The more we generate gratitude for what we have, sort of weakens our sense of neediness, right? Needing more. So check if that's the case or not. Mhm. And then a final antidote is thinking about impermanence and death. So one feature of attachment I didn't really mention is that the mind of attachment sort of is mixed with the false perception that, you know, the object of our attachment is going to last a long time, and the satisfaction we get is going to last. That is permanent. That it'll last forever. It won't go away. So one, thinking about how all things are impermanent, that they don't last, that they change and pass away, and then thinking about the fact of death, that this life, you know, our life will end, and then we'll be separated from all the objects of attachment. So what's the point in putting a lot of time into chasing after objects of attachment when, you know, we're definitely going to be separated from them and we don't know when that's going to happen? So that can also be like kind of lemon juice cutting through oil, cutting through grease, cuts through attachment. Okay, let's stop there and dedicate. So sorry, we don't have time for more questions. Although I'm around after the session. If you want to talk, I'm here. Yeah, so let's dedicate, thinking about whatever positive energy we've created, whatever merit or virtue we've created in this session, meditating and discussing and thinking about attachment and some antidotes to attachment. By the force of that, may oneself reduce, gradually reduce, and eventually be free from this distorted way of relating to things, relating to this unrealistic, distorted way of relating to objects and one's own person, one's reputation, and so forth. And then may the same be the case for all other sentient beings, all of our family, friends, strangers, enemies, humans, animals, and so forth. May all beings be free from different forms of afflicted attachment. And thereby may all beings be free from every form of dissatisfaction and suffering of body and mind. And may the world be free from all these huge problems of pollution of the environment and climate destruction. Really, climate destruction, you think about, all arises from attachment. Wanting to have material goods and then polluting the environment in order to have exactly like the kind of comfort we want. It's totally a very good example of how attachment leads to destruction. Also, the war in Ukraine, The recent war just started between Hamas and what is it, Israel. May those be pacified. May they find peaceful solution to those conflicts. And in other places in the world, wherever there's violent conflict between groups or nations or individuals, may that all be pacified. And may the world become a perfect place for spiritual practice. May all beings eventually reach the state of a perfect state of enlightenment. And bring to mind any other prayers you'd like to make. So may all those virtuous prayers of your own be accomplished exactly in accordance with your intention. Okay, thank you all. And yeah, hope to see you next week for a session on anger.